going around and just giving our name, because there are a couple new people, and saying one animal that you really like that lives in this area. So not one that's, lives in Australia, but one from around your area or around New Mexico. Or you could even pick your favorite plant if you're more of a plant person. Very annoying. So let's see. I haven't really thought about it because I have so many. One that always comes to mind is the gray fox. I really like them, and they're really quiet and secretive. And I see a lot of evidence of them in the mountains, like tracks and scat, poop on the trail. But it's very rare that I've ever seen one. And I remember the one time I saw one, I was hiking with a group, and just in front of me, it disappeared into the trees. I just saw its tail, and none of the group I was with got to see it. But I just think they're really neat that they're that quiet, but they're always around. So who would like to go next? And you don't have to tell a whole story. You can just pick an animal. Let's see. Jonathan, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. My name is Jonathan. My favorite animal that lives around here, I guess jackrabbits. Jackrabbits are cool.
Yeah, it's amazing how big they are. Nice, thanks. Ariana or George Washington?
My name is Ariana, George Washington. Let's see, my favorite animal that lives around here would be the coyotes. They like make such nice, their noises are like so interesting, and the babies are like adorable. So I love when they howl in the middle of the night. So those are my favorite.
Nice. Very cool. Who wants to go next? Let's see. How about my cat? She just meowed. Faith, do you want to go?
Oh, no, you can't. Okay, sorry, I was on mute. Uh, my name is Faith, and my favorite animal from around here would probably be a horse.
Mm-hmm. Cool. How about Naomi?
Okay, my name is Naomi, and I guess my favorite animal that lives around here is I like porcupines. They're pretty cute.
They are. I finally
Fun
spotted
to
one
find.
myself the other day. They're so hard to spot up in the trees. Nice. And Jackson.
My name is Jackson, and I guess my favorite animal that lives around here would be a fox.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're adorable.
They are. And how about Shay?
My name's Shay, and my favorite animal is probably a roadrunner.
They're really cool. I couldn't believe they're actually all over the place here when I first moved to New Mexico, because that's such a stereotype of the Southwest, but it's true. Nice. How about Raylyn?
My name's Jaylyn, and my favorite animal is probably a tarantula.
Ooh, they're cool. Awesome. And Audrey?
My name is Audrey. I think my favorite is the fox also.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And I think, let's see, Isaac and Robert, you just joined, I think. So we're sharing our name again, and then our favorite animal from New Mexico or from this area. You guys want to go? Isaac and Robert, there you
go. I'm Isaac, and my favorite animal is probably fox too.
I got a trend going.
I'm Robert. I kind of like roadrunners.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. We might have some trouble with the roadrunners and the foxes, although roadrunners can take care of themselves. All right, I think that I got everyone, looks like. And welcome to everyone who's new today, and everyone who's back from last week. So last week we covered the kind of the basics of what climate change is. Not that basic though, it gets pretty complicated. But what it is, what's causing it, the fact that we have our planet changing in a lot of ways. So it getting, hotter in general. But as you guys might be noticing, we're getting some interesting snowy cold weather right now. And if you've heard about Texas, they're in a deep freeze with tons of people that have lost power. There's some weird weather happening. And so even this wintry weather and this cold weather and these storms can be due to climate change, because climate change can cause a lot of like ups and downs of weather and
Yeah.
extreme weather that comes out of nowhere. Yeah, do you want to add to that?
It can be called global warming, but that's not technically correct because in some places it will actually lower the temperature in those areas.
Exactly. Yep. So overall, the average on the entire planet, if you guys remember from last week, the entire average on the planet is heating up. But depending on where you're at, yeah, some places are actually getting colder, or they get colder sometimes and hotter other times. So today we're going to take kind of what we know about those things and about the forest fires we talked about, and we're going to think about the animals and also the trees and the plants and how they are affected by all these things. Before I get into that, did anyone want to start off by sharing anything they thought of from the homework assignment I gave, which was to think about how climate change and the things we talked about last week might affect your area? So if you have fires around you or flooding or, yeah, Jackson, you want to go?
This is kind of just like the general area of near Mexico or any place with climate change. If there's climate change, there could be more forest fires, which will burn down the forest, and then herbivores will have to go because there are no plants to eat, because they'll either have to go or starve, and then the carnivores will have to go because they'll have no meat to eat, and then you'll get into this ecosystem with no life, only maybe shrubs.
Yeah, or things will be really thrown off balance. And you could help me teach this class today, because that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about is all those connections, like one thing happens and it causes another thing to happen. Yes, so excellent job putting that all together. And that is where it gets really complicated, but also where we really start to see like how one thing changing can really change other things too. And sometimes it can change for the better. There's some species that actually get better when it heats up. There's more of them, but overall it can throw off that balance a lot, and that can cause a lot of problems.
Yes.
Awesome. Anyone else want to share anything they thought of from the homework or anything they looked up that was interesting? Your cat does what mine does, but its tail over the screen. Let's see. Naomi, do you want to go?
I was thinking since like the heating will make it more likely to have fires. Fires produce a lot of smoke, and for some people, like they can't handle like the smoke very well, so it might affect like they have to stay inside more and they can't breathe very well, and some people will have to get treatment for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it can cause health problems and it can make ones worse if people already have asthma or other breathing problems. Sarah, did you want to share something?
No, I was just going to say, it looks like Faith wants to talk to you.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add to what Naomi said. I was also thinking about that because my grandma and aunt are staying in their house a lot, because of the coronavirus, and they're not going outside a lot. So it also, when you have to stay inside because of anything, but, smoke and stuff, it weakens your immune system. And then when you can go outside again, you're more likely to get sick than before because you have a weaker immune system.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, so there's also those like compound or, one thing leads to another with us humans too, and health. Yeah. And that's something so important to think about, because I think a lot of times, like, since I'm an environmental educator, I get caught up in like what's happening to the plants and the animals and the ecosystem, or like the natural world. But humans, we're just as much a part of that world and that ecosystem. So it is really important to think about how it's affecting us. And I'll try to talk some about that today too. I've got some information on that too. All right, anything else before I get into my slideshow for the day? I really like that you guys are thinking so critically. That is awesome. All right, so I'm going to share it, and hopefully I'm going to be able to see you guys today while I'm screen sharing. That is my hope. All right. So today, as I said, we're going to think about the impacts of ecosystem changes. So due to climate change and due to fires, which can also be due to climate change, on the wildlife. So we'll focus a lot on animals, but we can talk about the plants, and we definitely need to talk about the plants also. So big questions, as climate and ecosystems change, what happens to the animals and plants? Can they survive? Oops, I messed up that second sentence. Can they survive? And then how can we use science to study these effects or kind of see what the animals are doing or how they might be changing their behavior, where they are, or anything like that. And you guys might remember these pictures from last week. And I know that some of you that weren't there watched the recording. And so this is the Doghead Fire, which was in the Manzano Mountains south of Albuquerque. So down by Las Lunas and Belen, that area. And this was a fire in 2016 that just swept through pretty quickly. It wasn't a huge fire, but it did get pretty hot. And you can see it just burned out any plants that were on the ground. I'm sure all the animals had to flee. And again, luckily it wasn't a huge fire, so they didn't necessarily have to flee super far, but it still got pretty big. You can see all the trees are charred. So just think about if you were a mule deer, or you were a rabbit, or you were an animal that, you know, lives in the woods, how would that affect your ability to survive? Like, do you think these deer would stay right in that area right when the fire happened? Probably not, right?
No.
Yeah, probably not. And then, oh yeah, I took out that one. So yeah, I would say the deer would probably flee. That doesn't mean they wouldn't come back. Like I've been back down there in the years since the fire, and there already are a lot of new plants growing in because, you know, seeds can blow in on the wind, or an animal could walk through there later and bring a seed on its fur. So there is a lot coming back quickly. And I've heard that there's been turkeys back there, there's been deer back there. So it doesn't mean that the ecosystem can't recover, but for a while, it's going to be a big problem for the wildlife. And if you remember, we talked about last week kind of the difference between wildfires and just regular forest fires. And wildfires are the ones that get huge and out of control and burn like tons of land, and they might kill all of the trees in the area. And that's going to take a really long time to recover. So that means this mule deer or other animals that need that forest won't be able to return for a really long time. If it's a smaller forest fire, or if it's just in a little section, like more natural fires tend to be, that aren't being worsened by climate change or aren't being worsened by, I think I talked about last week, like for many years, humans were suppressing fire and they weren't allowing fires. So the trees got really dense together, if you remember that. And so that causes worse fires when there actually is one. So if you get those huge fires, that's a problem. But if you get smaller fires, or if the trees are already kind of far apart because of past fires, then the animals might be able to still come back pretty soon after. So one way we have of studying that, and some of you might be familiar with these cameras, if you go hunting, people use them, or sometimes people just put them in their backyard because they're interested to see what is around them. And so they're a motion sensor, and they're also heat sensor, so they can sense animals' body heat of mammals or birds, and they'll take pictures automatically. And I just leave these out in the woods in the area that I work in the mountains all the time. They're on 24 hours a day, every day of the year. And they get a lot of really cool photos of our wildlife. So by doing this, you can learn, well, actually, I'm going to show you the video first. So those are a couple of photos from the camera. And you guys should be able to see this video window, right? Did that pop up? Okay.
Yep, you're good.
Okay. And I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear the sound or not. I can't remember what setting I chose.
Yep.
So we have lots of animals here. Foxes, like we were talking about, those are gray foxes. Crows and ravens, dogs, raccoons, turkeys, rabbits sometimes, more foxes, they come a lot, mountain lions, deer, skunks, little owls, Steller's jays, squirrels, more skunks, more turkeys. And all these pictures were from spring of 2020 bears. So we got a lot of bears this last year with cubs. Ravens, more foxes. That's a pigeon, I think. More bears, more foxes, more deer. And I just love downloading these pictures and seeing what might have been there recently. It's very cool. All these bear photos were really exciting this year too. And we've been getting a lot of deer, which is interesting. And more mountain lion visits than usual too this year. More deer, more ravens. So in some of the deer pictures and things, like they'll just come and hang out for a while. So we'll just get lots and lots of photos in a row of a whole group of them. Mountain lions don't come as often, but every once in a while. And one interesting thing I've noticed is in 2020, since the pandemic, we have been getting more pictures of bears and mountain lions and some of these animals than we have in the last few years. So I was wondering if that might just have to do with humans not being there as much, when there's large groups of fifth graders, because that's normally the programs I do is for classes of fifth graders of like 20 to 30 kids and adults. The animals aren't going to want to be around as much. So that's one thing we could learn from this. I'll show you guys a few more of these because they're cool. Raccoons, bears, so lots of different color fur bears, but they're all black bears. So you guys get the idea. And that video is on our YouTube channel too if you want to watch it again later. So pretty cool stuff. And then this photo here is a mountain lion from 2015. I just really like that photo, and a skunk. So you can learn all kinds of things from collecting these camera photos. So I'll download them to a computer, look through them, and then keep the data of when they visited. So what time of day, what temperature it was, how many visits per month. So you could look at, our mountain lions visiting more in the spring or summer or fall, and I'll show you guys some graphs of those things. Visits over the years, so you can see, were they visiting a lot in the past and now they're not, or vice versa, and you can, try to ask yourself why that might be and do more research to find out if you're a scientist studying it. You can look at species range, which I'll talk more about in a bit, but like where the animals go, how far they roam. And then the population's a really complicated one, but scientists can use, if they put up a bunch of cameras and they use like computer models and mathematical models and sometimes like hair snare studies. I did a study on bears where we would put out barbed wire, we would wrap it around trees, and we would put a bait in the middle. We didn't want the bears to eat it, but we would just want them to smell it. It was cow's blood and fish emulsion. And then sometimes we'd put out skunk scent. And then the bears would come and investigate, and they would have to walk under or over the barbed wire to get to the middle, and their hair would get stuck. And we'd collect the hair, it would get sent to a lab, and the scientists would actually test the DNA. And by doing that, they could try to determine how many bears were using that area. So you can't just get the population from camera pictures, but you can use like a combination of different research for that. And here's an example of one of the graphs. So this was deer visits to Mud Spring per year. So from 2008, when there were no visits, and that's probably because we had another natural spring. So I didn't say actually, this area where these cameras are is a natural spring. And if you guys are familiar with springs, there's hot springs like in the Jemez and stuff. A spring is when the water is above the surface. And so these aren't hot springs, they're just regular temperature. And the animals can come and drink here. And since there's not a lot of water in the Sandia Mountains, there's not like big rivers and lakes and things like that, then this water is really important, which is why we put the camera there. There used to be another spring just about a quarter mile from this one though that had water in it. And so I think the deer were going more over to that one in like the early years. And then that spring dried up. The water went underground, which could be due to climate change because drought. And then you can see though, in more recent years, it's really increased. So it kind of started going up in 2011, 2016, 17, 18, we got a lot of deer visits, almost 100 days that they visited in 2017. And this year was way, way up, over 150, like 170 visit days. So like half the year where we had deer visiting, which again could have to do with the pandemic, that we don't have people around. But we've also been noticing this trend since those forest fires. So remember, if you remember last week, I showed a video at the end of a prescribed burn. And I was talking about how the forest rangers came in and they cut down trees and they burned the area to open up space for other plants to grow. And then once they did that, then the deer started maybe coming back more, because now they had these low to the ground oak trees. If you remember that video I showed of kind of like walking through the forest, there were a lot of oak trees, like little ones that the deer could eat. And that might have brought them back. So we can't say for sure, you know, you'd have to do a lot more research to know for sure, but it was interesting that the numbers went up as the food sources came back. You know, if you were a deer, you might want to come back too if there's water and food for you. Any questions so far? I know I've just explained a lot. All right. And then heat limits for wildlife. So obviously with climate change, there are a lot of places heating up, especially in the summer. You know, the summer temperatures are getting hotter and hotter, like we talked about before. So can a species survive the heat? You know, how hot is too hot? Like when is it going to get too hot for them to be able to live or to be able to go out of their burrow? And it's hard to answer those questions, but those are some of the questions that scientists are asking. And thinking about like what can animals do when it gets too hot, or what can plants do? So this is a picture of a pika, and pikas are really adorable. These little mammals that live only in the highest elevations of the mountains. So they live in northern New Mexico, they live in Valles Caldera, they live in parts of Santa Fe National Forest up in that area, anywhere where it's cool enough and wet enough and high enough up. So what happens when it keeps getting hotter? You know, what is that little pika gonna do? Anyone have any idea, if you were a pika, what you would do if it was getting too hot?
I'd move or go higher up.
Yeah, so moving, one option, like if there was higher up to go, especially, that's a really good point, they could go higher up the mountain. But what happens if they're already at the top of the mountain? Or what happens if, you know, there's no higher up to go anymore?
Then you'd have to leave and find a new place.
Yeah. And that's true. They can try, but unfortunately, pikas are little. They can't travel that far, and they'd have to go to another mountaintop. So they'd have to climb down the mountain they're at, go across, you know, maybe desert or very dry land to get up to another mountain. So I think it's excellent you're thinking that way, because some animals can do that kind of thing, like deer or elk or larger animals, you know, might be able to travel across large, you know, large areas of land.
They're so small.
Yeah,
Anything can
so
eat them.
yeah,
Or-
things could eat them. They could just, and they actually can't really be outside when it's above the high 70s. Their limit is kind of like 78 degrees. So what they'll do is go down into their burrows. And luckily, I did read an article just the other day. Like scientists are really worried about pikas with climate change. But luckily, I read an article the other day that they might not need to be as worried as they thought they had to be, because they can go down into their burrows and just wait out the heat and store food. So they're doing a decent job of adapting and like kind of surviving through the heat at the moment. But in the future, who knows? But yeah, so you think about some of these animals could move, some of them can't, but they can go in burrows is one option, at least for a while. They can do what this bear is doing in 2009, which is taking a nice bath in the spring. So that's the mud spring back in 2009 when it actually had some more water in it. Nowadays, though, in 2020, there's not much water left. It's sitting in a little mud puddle there in August, but it's not really finding much relief probably from the heat, which is another problem, because the less water, you know, the less they can drink and the less they can cool off in it. But, you know, they do have behaviors to try to cool down. This is some other graphs I made from the camera visits, so you can kind of look at like when different animals are visiting. So foxes were visiting a lot in the colder temperatures, like 25 to 29 degrees Fahrenheit and kind of those 30s and 40s, and then a lot at 50 to 55 to 59. So kind of cold to cool, which makes sense too, because a lot of foxes come out at night and come to the spring at night. And then comparing to turkeys, turkeys will kind of like visit a good amount in the cold temperatures, and then a lot in like the 50s to 60s, and then even a lot in the heat, which is interesting. So I wonder if they're coming to the spring to cool down, or because they need more water because it's so hot out. So there's different reasons animals will kind of go out and about at different times of the day and at different temperatures. But these are ways for us to kind of see like when they tend to come or when they like to come. And you could track how that changes over, over time if you wanted to. So here's what you were talking about, Jackson. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with life zones at all. Has anyone ever heard of a mountain life zone, or how you have different life zones as you go up a mountain? Anyone heard that before? No? I don't see any reaction. So what a life zone is, basically like in the Sandias, in the Jemez, in the, any mountains in New Mexico, anywhere, any of the mountains that you live near, you're going to have the lower part, sometimes that's below the mountain. You might have desert, things like that. And then as you climb up the mountain, as you go up in elevation, you get into these different types of forest or different types of ecosystems. So you get into the pinyon juniper, which is really common at the elevation I normally work at in the Sandias, which is 7,000 feet. You get into ponderosa pine forest, which are those big tall trees with the orange colored bark and really long needles as you get higher. And then you get up into mixed conifer, which would be like pines and firs and other trees that need that area where it's cooler and wetter. And then finally, spruce fir, and then even some mountains, if they're tall enough, you could get into the tundra where you don't even really have trees anymore because it's so cold. So as you guys probably know, but let's test your knowledge. I want you to put your finger up or down if you think it goes up or down. So do you think as you go up the mountain, as you go up in elevation, do you think the temperature goes up or down? So as you're going up the mountain, does the temperature go up or down? Does it get hotter or colder when you go up the mountain? Let's see. Yep, now I'm seeing mostly downs. Yep, so you guys probably learned that.
Further away from the Earth's core.
You are, yeah, in the atmosphere, I know the air is kind of more spread out. I think that has to do with it. There's some different reasons, yeah. And then when you go up the mountain, do you think it gets wetter or drier? So we're going up the mountain again. Is it wetter? So wetter, point up, or drier, point down? I'm seeing
lots of wetter.
And you guys can type in the chat too if you have your camera off. Okay, so I'm seeing mostly wetter. Yep. So yeah, that's usually true. And it depends what side of the mountain you're on. Sometimes one side is wetter than the other. So as Jackson was saying, if you are an animal that needs cooler wetter temperature, then you are going to go, up the mountain to try to get to that as things get hotter and drier. So that's one way animals can deal with it. And then plants will also do that. Obviously they can't uproot themselves and walk their way up the mountain. So an individual pine tree or something is not going to be able to move, and it might actually die or get really stressed because it's not getting enough water. It's too hot. But you obviously have seeds. And so as the seeds sprout, the ones that land further up the mountain might be more likely to survive. And the ones that land further down the mountain, if it's too dry or too hot or not the right conditions anymore, are going to die quicker. So by that, you kind of get this slow movement or progression where you're getting these species moving up the mountain to be able to survive, if that makes sense. So it's kind of over time with plants. It's not like they can just pick up and move.
There's one plant that lives underwater that looks like a flower. It's actually an animal. And if it lives like in the twilight zone underwater. And if it's in danger, it will use its petals to crawl away.
Whoa,
Petals are actually legs. It'll pull itself with its petals on the seafloor.
that's awesome. That's an amazing adaptation. Yeah, so some species do have really special adaptations, and you guys are probably all familiar with that word adaptation, something that helps a plant or an animal or a living thing survive. So that one is a really special one. I will say that most plants cannot do that, but that would be great if they could.
It's an animal that looks like a plant.
Oh, got it. Okay, so it's actually an animal. That makes sense.
But it barely ever moves.
Thanks for sharing. That's awesome. And you can see, some animals like this eagle or whatever that is in the picture, they can pretty easily change elevations or go where they want to. But some animals or plants are going to have a much harder time doing that. And then again, like with the pika, if they get to the top, what happens? Where do they go from there if there's nowhere up to go anymore? And that's a big question that scientists are asking and wondering about. Any more thoughts or questions on life zones? All right, doesn't look like it. Cool. And then moving on to range then. So another thing animals could do or plants over time, is they might shift or change their range. So especially if things are getting hotter and drier, they might want to go further north. So you can actually study over time where you find a certain species, and then you can, see over the years, like, is it still being found in the same area? Is it being found in a different area? Is its range getting larger? Is range getting smaller? Like, what's happening? And one cool way you guys can be a part of this, or any of us can be a part of collecting this data, is a website called iNaturalist. And so I'll show you guys the site for a moment. So this is a program on iNaturalist. You should see a horned lizard picture, and it says New Mexico Nature Mapping. Cool. So this is one that I run and where I work runs, and you can submit reptile, amphibian, bird, or mammal sightings. And so you can see in the bottom here, there's a map of just like all the sightings that have been found in the state. But you can also click on certain species. So I'm going to go to the species section. And let's see. There's lots of birds on here, of course. Let's see if I can find one of the ones you guys mentioned. Oh, one of you likes a coyote. So looking at the coyote, you can actually pull up a map of all the places that coyotes have been seen in New Mexico. So, and on this site in general, you can look up beyond New Mexico. I'm just in the New Mexico portion of it. So lots around Albuquerque, and then you can see all the like red dots all around the state where you found a coyote. So this data, like everyone can just put in their own pictures and their own sightings. And then over time, people can figure out, where's like the range of the coyote, like how far north are they going, how far south, like how spread out is their range. And if you look at the actual full range of a coyote, they go all throughout the entire country. But depending on the species, they might have much smaller ranges. So if I zoom way out on this map, the entire country's red pretty much, except for some areas in the north. So coyotes live everywhere. They're very adaptable. We probably aren't too worried about coyotes. And then again, with that camera data, you can map out like what time of day animals visit. So if it's getting hotter, or they might wait till night to visit more, so you could maybe see changes in when they're visiting at different times or different years. Maybe they're going to visit the water more because it's getting drier, so they need more water. So there's a lot of things that could change with the patterns of like what time of day or when they're visiting. And this is just kind of interesting looking at this too, like skunks, as you'd expect, they visit in the night and late night. They're really nocturnal. Coyotes are kind of half and half. They visit in the daytime and the nighttime. Turkeys are mostly daytime, but a fair amount in the evening. And then bears, a lot of people think bears would be active at night, but actually they're more active, at least at the spring. They're more coming to the spring during the day and the evening.
We have some parrots, and once I was like 5, and I was watching a movie with my parents, and one of our parrots was outside in like a little outside cage that we have for him. And we heard crashing, and my parents went outside to check, and there was a bear trying to eat the bird food from inside the bird's cage while the bird was in the cage.
Whoa. Yeah, bears try to do what they can to get to food.
There was like a little metal plate on the top. The whole cage, but like there's this little like design on the top that a parrot on it, and it knocked the design off, but otherwise there was no damage to the cage at all.
That's impressive. Good cage. Yeah, bears will get to what they can. You got to be careful with bird food and pet food and trash because they will get into it.
Yeah.
And then this is actually a graph here of bear visits to Mud Springs. So they come to the spring the most in June and then July, and then they're also pretty active and at the spring in August, September, and October. And then as you'd expect, they kind of go near their dens or stay in their dens for most of the winter, so we don't get visits from bears in the winter. But over time, these trends could change too, like when they're visiting, if we look at that over, more years. So now I want to get into phenology, and we're going to get to the activity you guys are going to do outside in a minute if you're able to go outside. So phenology is studying the cyclic and seasonal natural phenomena. So basically, like, when do plants and animals do different things throughout the year? So when does, this mountain mahogany get its leaves? When does this currant, I think it is, I always forget. When does it get its berries? When does the butterfly transform? What was that, Jackson?
It's also like leaves changing color or birds migrating, something like that.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, and that's what these are, right? Because we've got these maple leaves changing color in the fall, and then the sandhill crane actually migrates to this area and to New Mexico in the winter. So exactly, like when they start migration, when they stop migration, basically like when are things happening throughout the year. And then a phenophase is one of those stages. So like when the berries happen, when the fruits happen, when the leaves happen are the different phenophases. So we can look at phenology to see when things happen during a year, changes from year to year, impacts of fires and weather and climate change and other things. You can ask lots of questions that you can answer with phenology. So like, when do flowers bloom? When do the piñons ripen? I know, a lot of you might care about that if you like to eat roasted piñons in the fall, and the bears and coyotes and foxes also care about it because they eat them. When do sandhill cranes or another bird species migrate? And then there's this citizen science program called Project Budburst, where just like iNaturalist, you can put in your own observations. And some questions they're asking are, how is climate change affecting plant phenology? So how is climate change changing when plants do certain things? And they're also asking, how are pollinators being affected by climate change? So we won't answer these questions just yet, but I've got a slide that brings up some interesting ideas about those after you guys do your activity. So there's a couple projects you can use to do phenology. One's called Nature's Notebook, one's called Project Budburst. We are going to do the activity from Nature's Notebook. This one in the middle is a picture from Project Budburst. So they've got these circles, and you can just choose what stage the flowers are at, if it has fruit, if the leaves are unfolding, if they're changing color. But I want to do the one that you guys have. So was everyone able to download or print the activity that I sent yesterday?
I got it printed out.
Okay, awesome. If you don't have a printer, that's fine. But if you have it downloaded on your computer, you can bring it up to look at, or I can also, I'll bring it up too and just kind of share it with you guys and explain it.
I can't go outside because we have 2 feet of snow, and if I open the door.
Got it. Yeah, that's okay. That's what I was going to say. So if you can go outside, I'm going to give you the chance to in a minute. And then it's a nice way to stretch your legs and then look at what's actually happening. But if you can't go outside, that's okay. You can either look through a window or open a door and listen to what's happening with the birds, because one of these activities is birds. Or you can just write down like what you know is happening right now if you've been out recently and noticed some things. So if you can't go outside, that's okay. But if you can, then I'll let you in just a minute. So let me pull up the
Fun fact, the pinyon pine, one way to tell if it's a pinyon pine is that it has 2 needles per fascicle.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, 2 needles in
Because,
each
like,
bunch.
3 or 4,
Awesome.
then it's a different kind of plant.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there
Awesome.
will be
Thanks for
some
sharing.
anomalies, but
Yep. All right, so everyone should see on the screen now the songbirds one. Hopefully you guys see that. I can't see you right now. All right, so
Yeah, we can see it. You're good.
awesome. So this is like if you were going to do it a bunch of times. So you're just going to look at this first column. Like, do you see any birds or do you hear any birds? Are there any birds eating? What are they eating if you can tell? Are they singing? Are they mating or kind of like females and males being together? Are they building a nest? Or are they any young? Are there any young around? So a lot of these things might not happen this time of
any
year.
birds right now except for ravens. We have a ton of ravens.
Well,
Ravens
you could look
gather
at them then.
my property in the winter. Literally, like most of the trees are black right now.
Mm-hmm.
My middle name actually means Raven's Meadow. In
Oh, wow, that's so cool.
that.
So the other one I want to show you guys, so you could pick one of these to do, or if you have time, you can do them both. So this other, I think I have to switch my sharing. There we go. So the conifer one, you can see or feel if the tree has any new needles or young needles that are small and soft. Does it have any pollen cones, like the little short pollen catkins? They're soft cones. Does it have any like hard cones? Does it have any seeds in the cones? So you're just kind of looking for like what stage, what's going on with these plants. Any questions on that? So I'm gonna give you guys then, let's do, we've got 9:44 right now. Let's come back at by 9:50. So you've got 6 minutes to go just kind of see what's going on either with a conifer, so that would be a tree that has needles or scales, an evergreen tree, or with the birds, and just try to answer some of these questions of like what stage they're at or what they're doing right now. And then meet back here. And you don't have to bring your computer with you, just go ahead and come back when you're done.
For the birds one, can I use ravens? Or is that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, because the ravens are kind of different than the smaller songbirds. Yeah, you can use ravens. Any species of bird. I think I can actually hear some out of my window right now. What did you notice about the ravens?
They usually come at like 3 or later, so there wasn't much now.
Mhm.
I usually go on my walks at like 3 or 4. So when I go out, there are just like actual hundreds of ravens circling in the sky. As
Oh
well as like
wow.
my dad yesterday. And there were just so many ravens wheeling. He took a video of them, and they were
Mhm.
just going in circles.
And have you ever noticed, like, do they do that all throughout the year, or they only do that in the winter?
Usually only in the winter. And in the summer, there are more songbirds and fewer ravens.
Got it. Yeah, so those are phenology effect things happening. Definitely, they might go to a different area, or they might kind of spread apart and not be in the big groups anymore. What did you
Jackson,
notice, Naomi?
oh,
Go ahead.
I was just going to tell Jackson, we've noticed the same thing. I don't think I've ever seen so many ravens in our area ever, except for this year. And when we had the very beginning of this 3-day storm, when it was thunder and lightning and still raining and the cold hadn't come yet, I was out in the backyard prepping all of our farm animals for the cold weather. And I looked up and there were just, probably thousands of ravens up in the sky. And against the stormy skies, it looked really crazy to see. I mean, I had something I'd never seen in our area before.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
I
pretty
wonder
cool.
if the storms are like, if they're reacting to the storms.
Yeah, I kind of wonder, because every time a new system came in, we saw more ravens again.
Huh.
So.
Yeah, so that could be a way. Obviously, climate change can affect that because it can cause more storms and stronger storms. So that might change behavior. Faith, were you going to share something?
Oh, no. I mean, if you want me to, I can read what I wrote.
Sure.
Okay.
And as you guys get back, if you can turn your cameras back on, or maybe just say, like, I'm here in the chat so I know you're back.
I have birds that have nests outside my house. They live in all of our bushes, and they have nests from our porch roof. They are always pecking and singing. There is normally new babies around our house in the spring. I don't know what they eat, but it is so awesome to see when they return to the nest to feed their babies. They use regurgitation. The birds that have made nests from my back porch like to fly super low. Sometimes when I'm coming inside, one will fly right in front of me so low that I could have touched it. Other times, a whole flock will take off out of the bushes in back of our house, and it sounds like 1,000 bees are humming. They are most active in spring, summer, and fall, not so much in winter. Some of the birds we have are hummingbirds and finches. My birds are usually singing in their nests in the early mornings. They often swoop out of bushes in the late afternoons.
Wow, that is amazing. Did you write that all just now?
Yes.
Whoa. Well, I can tell you are observing birds all the time, all through the year.
I just notice things when I go outside.
It's
a natural, I don't know.
Yeah, well, you'd make an excellent scientist then, because that's exactly what scientists are doing to study these things. You've got to be really observant and be able to remember everything you notice. Nice job. That's excellent.
We have one big tree where like all the ravens go. Night.
Yeah, so if some of you didn't hear that, we were talking about the ravens and how they've been like in huge groups and changing their behavior a lot with these storms. Anyone else want to share quickly what they observed? No?
I think
Audrey?
the most active birds in our backyard is our 3 chickens, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Well, it could change their behavior too, different weather. Yeah, so if we were to continue studying these changes, so imagine like apparently what Faith seems to have been doing is going out all the time and just noticing everything, as it changes throughout the year. That's when you start to learn more about what's really happening with phenology. And that's when we can start to look at these patterns of like what might be changing due to climate change. You know, like are animals suddenly you know, gathering in bigger groups like ravens, or are they coming sooner in the year? Like sometimes like hummingbirds will migrate here in the spring, so are you seeing hummingbirds show up sooner? You know, all kinds of different things like that. So if you guys want to keep doing this, or I can send you those links later to Nature's Notebook and Project Budburst. You could choose one of them, and then you could actually do, you know, submit your own observations all the time, or, you know, once a month or once a week or something. So let me pull up.
Actually came later.
What came later? The hummingbirds?
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
We put out,
Yeah.
usually they come around like early April to mid-April. So we put out all our hummingbird feeders because we get a ton of them, and we have to, they can't all fit on one feeder because they're all like fighting to eat. So we put out 17 feeders, and all the water just got cold before they actually came because they came in like late May.
Yeah, so things could get earlier or later, all kinds of stuff like that. So back to our slideshow, I just wanted to show you a couple examples of how these changes could affect the species if they are, if one thing changes, you know, what you were talking about at the beginning, Jackson, then other things can change. So here's an example with a cuckoo, a yellow-billed cuckoo that lives in New Mexico. They migrate very far. They actually go to Argentina for the winters sometimes, and then they'll go further. They'll be here in the summer. And then they eat things like grasshoppers and crickets and caterpillars. And so something that could happen with climate change is that some birds will actually migrate earlier if it warms up soon, you know, sooner in the spring, and they'll be like, oh, it's time to migrate. But then they need to fatten up for migration. They need to be, you know, have a lot of like extra fat on them so that they don't starve while they're migrating. And so if there aren't enough caterpillars out yet, or grasshoppers, you know, because it's too early in the year for the bugs to be out, then they can actually starve on their migration. And, you know, all along the way, they expect there to be enough food for them at all of their stopover points that they stop at during migration. So it would be like, you know, if you're traveling across the country and suddenly you can't get any food anywhere, all the grocery stores are closed, all the restaurants are closed, like there's nowhere to get food, then what are you going to do? And these birds can't even go to a grocery store. So that can be a real problem if their food suddenly isn't available when they're migrating. And that's not just this species, but a lot of species could have that problem. And then pollination. So bees, hummingbirds, like we're talking about, butterflies, wasps, you know, all these pollinators drink the nectar from the flowers. But imagine if the time that they're, you know, getting to an area, or the time that they're out and about flying around, is not the same time that the flowers that they drink from are in bloom. What's going to happen then if they can't get their nectar?
They're all gonna die because
Yep. And if you guys have been hearing the stories over several years now, people are really worried about pollinators because they're in decline. We're seeing less and less of our native bees and these species that we need, the plants need, because they also help, of course, pollinate the plants and may allow more plants to be able to grow. So they need the flowers to be in bloom at the same time that they're active. So again, that's a problem if that site, or if that pattern, or when those things happens gets thrown off by these changes to our climate. And then one more example here that affects plants, bugs, bears, all sorts of things, is the pinon pine tree. Anyone like to eat pinons? I know I do. No. So this is the seeds. You like to? So this is the seeds from the pinon pine tree. They grow inside of a cone. Sometimes if the pinon pine trees are stressed, and they're actually, scientists are really worried that we could actually lose pinon pine trees in New Mexico, or a lot of the ones that are here, because they get very stressed by heat and dryness. And so if it's too hot, it's too dry, they might get really weak. They might not produce their seeds at all because they're just trying to survive. So they're not going to make piñons. And when they get weak, this little guy, which is not as big as this, it's kind of scary looking. This is a bark beetle, and the bark beetle will go into the bark of the tree. It'll eat its way around on the inside of the bark. And if you get too many bark beetles in one tree, it can kill the tree. And they will actually take advantage of trees that are already weak. So they'll go into the trees that are already not doing well, and that can kill a lot of our piñon pines. And then our bears won't have any piñons to eat, and that's one of the foods they rely on. Luckily, bears can also eat acorns and juniper berries and cactus fruit and bugs and all kinds of other things. But, you know, any of those trees that aren't producing fruit or any of those bugs that aren't out at the right time could also affect our mammals, our bears or our birds even, that rely on those things for food. So just like you were saying at the beginning, Jackson, there's all these connections. You know, one thing can affect another thing, can affect another thing. And I just want to, I know we're about out of time. So if anyone needs to go in a minute, you can. But I did want to bring it back to humans. So of course, this is going to affect us too, right? Because we need food. So farmers trying to grow food when there's not as much water is really hard. This year, they're actually telling farmers apparently not to farm in certain areas if they don't have to. But it's like, what farmer doesn't have to farm? And if you're trying to find wild food, you know, anyone who forages or hunts, that could really throw off where you're able to find the plants and the animals that you need. Longer spring flower blooms can actually increase asthma and allergy problems for people. So sometimes the flowers are blooming for a longer period of time, which seems good, but it can have bad effects too. And coronavirus even could relate to this. So viruses and bacteria and other things that are spread by mosquitoes and mice and other animals. Of course, you know, coronavirus isn't spread by mosquitoes or mice, but these diseases could actually either be spread more easily due to climate change or less easily. So it could have positive effects, but it all depends on which animal and which virus or bacteria you're talking about. But we could see more outbreaks of diseases in the future if the wrong animal, like if mosquitoes do really well, then they could spread more of the diseases. And then, yeah, so that brings us to the end. But if you guys, have final comments, if you want to discuss anything a little bit, then I'm glad to stick around a few more minutes.
I have some piñons out there, and I could get outside maybe for a few minutes and get a cone to show everyone.
I think we're about out of time, but that would be a great thing for you to look at. Maybe show it next week at the beginning of class. Or just take a look yourself. And like I said, doing those phenology observations is something you could keep doing and then really get a sense of how things are changing. Anyone else want to ask anything or share anything before we close out? All right, well, I hope you guys have enjoyed and learned some stuff from the program today. And you won't be seeing me anymore as of next week. I'll be back for the last week, but it'll be someone else, Allison, who's going to be talking a lot about the river, the Rio Grande, and the changes in ecosystem and all of that all along the river for the next 3 weeks. Sarah, anything else you want to add?
No, I don't think so. I just
Thank you.
want to thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Fiona. That was a really interesting class, and I hope you guys learned a little bit. Are you going to, even though you won't be in class next week, are you going to give them an assignment to work on this week? Or
yeah, I will send some stuff, and I do have an assignment. I think I've got one about pikas. It'll be part of a whole PDF, but I'll tell you guys which part to look at. And there's a activity, like a worksheet activity that I made about the pikas and climate change. So I'll send that, and then I'll send a few more like resources if you guys want to do some extra learning and video watching, or to do some more learning on your own.
awesome. And then any assignments that you guys do have that you want to turn in, you can either email them to Fiona or you can email them to me too. We love to see what you guys are working on, what ideas you come up with, and where your thought processes are going. So if you feel the urge to share, definitely share. We want to see.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you guys have questions or anything like that, feel free to email me too at the email address that I sent you guys the assignments at.
Cool.
All right,
Thank
well,
you,
have a
Deanna.
great rest of your day.
Have a good day, guys. See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. See you next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.